Captain Susan Morris stood at the massive window of the ES of Valiant's bridge, her gray eyes fixed on the strange patterns appearing on the holographic display. The ship's sensors were picking up something unusual, energy readings that made no sense in normal space. "Captain, we're getting more strange signals," said Officer Paul Green, his fingers dancing over the glowing control panel. "They're coming from the direction of the Centauri system." Susan walked over to his station, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. The readings looked like angry red scratches across the otherwise calm blue display of normal space. In her 15 years of service, she'd never seen anything quite like it. "Send the data to my personal screen," she ordered, sitting down in her command chair. As she studied the information more closely, a cold feeling settled in her stomach. The energy patterns matched something she'd seen only once before, during the First Contact War. The bridge crew worked quietly around her, each person focused on their tasks. Through the main window, the stars looked peaceful, but Susan knew better. Space was never truly peaceful. It was just waiting to show its darker side. "Get me Admiral Thompson," she said finally. "Priority channel." Within moments, Admiral Mary Thompson's face appeared on the main screen. Even through the video feed, Susan could see the worry lines around her eyes. "Captain Morris, I'm guessing you've seen it too," the Admiral asked. "Yes, Mom. The energy signatures match the pattern we saw before the XRKF tried to invade Mars colony." Susan pulled up the comparison data on a side screen. "But this time, the readings are at least 100 times stronger." Admiral Thompson nodded slowly. "We're picking up similar readings from 12 different sectors. The Galactic Council is demanding we explain why our battle fleet still uses nightmare space for travel when civilized species abandoned it centuries ago." Susan felt her jaw tighten. The Council had been pushing this issue for years, never understanding that humans didn't use nightmare space because they wanted to. They used it because they had to. "They still don't get it, do they?" Susan said, shaking her head. "We go through nightmare space because what lives there knows us now. They're used to us. If we stopped..." She let the thought hang unfinished. "The Council called an emergency meeting," Admiral Thompson continued. "They're scared. They say our fleet's constant use of nightmare space is attracting attention from things that should stay hidden. Captain, I need you to bring the Valiant to Earth immediately. Use normal space. We don't want to spook them more than they already are." Just then, Officer Green's console lit up with urgent red warnings. "Captain, massive energy spike in Sector 7. Susan turned to look at the main display just as space itself seemed to tear open. Through the rent in reality, something massive began to emerge. It wasn't a ship, at least not any kind of ship Susan had ever seen. It looked more like a piece of night sky had decided to move on its own. "Admiral," Susan said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I think we're about to find out why the readings are so strong." The thing in space unfolded itself, revealing shapes that hurt the eyes to look at. Around it, normal space began to ripple like water in a pond. "All hands to battle stations," Susan ordered, her training taking over. "Shields at maximum. And someone get me a direct line to Earth Defense Command." As the crew rushed to comply, Susan shared a knowing look with Admiral Thompson. They both understood what this meant. For years, humanity had been criticized for using nightmare space, for consorting with horrors, as some alien species put it. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes the real horrors weren't the ones hiding in the dark. Sometimes the real horrors were the ones that smiled at you in the light, all while gathering their forces to strike. "Captain," Admiral Thompson said quietly, "if this is what I think it is, then the Council is about to learn why we never stopped traveling through nightmare space. Send your data to all Earth forces. Authorization code: Dark Passage." Susan felt her blood run cold. Dark Passage was the highest level alert in the Earth Defense Force. As she gave the orders to her crew, she couldn't help but think that the galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about humanity. Sometimes, the monsters you know are better than the ones you don't. Lieutenant John Baker walked into the grand meeting hall of the Centauri Alliance with his head held high. The massive room sparkled with crystal decorations and floating lights, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way the alien delegates watched him, or how quiet the usually busy hall was. "Welcome, representative of Earth," said Ambassador Krell of the Tarkath. The tall, blue-skinned alien bowed slightly, his 4 arms moving in what was supposed to be a peaceful greeting. "We are honored by your presence." John smiled and bowed back, remembering his diplomatic training. "The honor is mine, Ambassador. Earth looks forward to strengthening our ties with the Alliance." But as he straightened up, he noticed something strange. The normal guards had been replaced by what looked like Special Forces troops. Their armor was too heavy for a peaceful meeting. "Please, sit," Krell said, gesturing to a single chair in the center of the room. "We have much to discuss." John sat down, keeping his face calm even as he pressed the small emergency button on his wrist communicator. Something was very wrong here. "Lieutenant Baker," Krell said, his voice suddenly cold, "your people have caused quite a problem for us. Your constant use of nightmare space has attracted attention." "We've explained this before," John said carefully. "Earth's fleet uses nightmare space because you're arrogant," another delegate shouted. "You humans think you're special, that you alone can handle the horrors between dimensions." John stood up slowly, noticing that more armed guards had entered the room. "If this is no longer a diplomatic meeting, I should leave." Ambassador Krell laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Oh, but this is diplomatic. We're diplomatically informing you that the combined forces of 10 million worlds have decided Earth needs to be contained." The walls of the meeting hall suddenly became transparent, revealing the space beyond. John's heart almost stopped. Thousands upon thousands of warships filled the sky, their weapons already powered up. "This is just one small part of our fleet," Krell said proudly. "The rest are gathering as we speak. Soon, we will have enough ships to surround your entire solar system." John's mind raced. 10 million worlds. The combined might of that many civilizations would be unstoppable in normal space. "You don't understand," John said, backing away from the advancing guards. "We don't use nightmare space because we're arrogant. We use it because..." A blast of energy hit him in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. As his vision blurred, he saw Ambassador Krell standing over him. "Because you're scared." Krell laughed. "Good. You should be. Our fleet will reach Earth in 7 days, traveling through normal space like civilized beings, and there's nothing your pathetic battle fleet can do about it." John managed to smile, even through the pain. "You're right about one thing," he gasped. "We are scared, but not of nightmare space. We're scared of what would happen if we stopped using it." His wrist communicator beeped twice, signal received. Emergency protocols were already starting. As darkness took him, John almost felt sorry for the aliens. They thought they were teaching humanity a lesson. Instead, they were about to learn one themselves. Back on the ISS Valiant, Captain Susan Morris received John's emergency signal along with his final sensor readings. The size of the alien fleet made her blood run cold. "Send everything to Admiral Thompson," she ordered, "and get our engines ready. If they're coming through normal space, we'll need to take the other route." "Captain," Officer Green said nervously, "are we really going to take the whole fleet through nightmare space at once?" Susan looked at the massive alien armada on her screen. "They've given us no choice. They think we use nightmare space because we're stubborn or crazy. Time to show them the real reason." As the Earth battle fleet began to gather, Susan thought about what was coming. The aliens had strength in numbers, but they'd forgotten one important thing. Sometimes the safest path isn't the one everyone else is taking. Sometimes the safest path is through your worst nightmares. "All ships, prepare for dark passage protocol," she announced over the fleet channel. "We're taking the shortcut through hell." Admiral Mary Thompson stood in Earth Defense Command's main control room, watching as 500 ships of the Earth battle fleet moved into formation. Each ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, built not just for normal space, but for something much worse. Operation Dark Passage is now active, she announced, her voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. All ships prepare for nightmare space transit. On the bridge of the EFS Valiant, young navigator Robert Clark tried to keep his hands steady as he programmed the jump coordinates. At 25, he was one of the youngest navigators in the fleet, but he'd already made 12 trips through nightmare space. "Remember your training," Captain Morris said kindly, noticing his nervousness. "You've done this before." "Not with the whole fleet," Robert replied. "And never for this long. We'll be in there for days." The captain nodded. "That's why we chose you. Your mind is strong. You can handle it." Robert took a deep breath and focused on his controls. The massive view screen showed the rest of the fleet moving into position. 500 ships arranged in a perfect sphere formation. They would need to stay close to survive what was coming. "All ships report ready," Officer Green announced. "Jump calculations complete." Captain Morris stood up. "Send the final message to Earth Command." Robert pressed the transmit button, knowing this would be their last contact with Earth for a while. Normal communications didn't work in nightmare space. "Fleet is ready," Admiral Thompson's voice came back. "Remember, people, we need to exit nightmare space behind the alien armada. Timing has to be perfect." "Beginning jump sequence," Robert announced. His fingers moved across the control panel, entering the complex equations that would tear a hole between dimensions. The space in front of the fleet began to change. Stars seemed to bend and twist, and a massive dark tear appeared. Robert felt the familiar pressure in his head, the first sign that reality was about to stop making sense. "All ships, maintain formation," Captain Morris ordered. "Nightmare space entry in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The fleet plunged into darkness. Robert immediately felt the change. Colors that didn't exist filled his vision. Sounds that couldn't be real echoed in his mind. This was why most species avoided nightmare space. It didn't just break the laws of physics, it broke the laws of sanity. "Transit successful," he managed to say, fighting down his nausea. "All ships accounted for." Through the view screen, he could see things moving in the darkness, shapes that hurt to look at, beings that shouldn't exist. But they weren't attacking. They never attacked Earth ships anymore. "How long can you hold course?" Captain Morris asked. Robert checked his instruments, though they were already starting to show impossible readings. 4 days, maybe 5. After that, he didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened to navigators who stayed in nightmare space too long. The human mind could only bend so far before it broke. "Communications from the Defender," Officer Green reported. "Their navigator is already showing strain." Captain Morris frowned. "Switch to backup navigator on all ships. Rotate every 6 hours. We need everyone's minds intact when we reach the alien fleet." Robert felt something brush against his thoughts, a creature from this dark dimension trying to communicate. He didn't push it away. That was the secret, the thing other species never learned. You didn't fight nightmare space. You accepted it. Hour after hour, the fleet moved deeper into the impossible darkness. Robert saw other navigators break down, their minds unable to handle the strain. But he held on, focusing on his training, remembering why they were here. On the 4th day, as Robert's mind felt ready to snap, their sensors picked up something ahead. The alien armada, still moving through normal space, completely unaware of what was coming. "All ships prepare for transit," Captain Morris ordered. "We're about to show them why we travel through hell." Robert began the calculations for the exit jump, his hands shaking but his mind clear. As he worked, he felt the entities of nightmare space gathering around the fleet, drawn to the coming battle like moths to a flame. The aliens were about to learn that there were worse things than humans in the dark places between stars. Much worse things. Chief Engineer Patricia Hughes stood in the engine room of the EFS Valiant, watching readings that should have been impossible. The ship's sensors were picking up energy patterns that defied every law of physics she'd ever learned. "Look at this," she said to her assistant, pointing to a screen filled with swirling patterns. "The beings out there, they're not random monsters. They're organized." Through the reinforced windows of the engine room, she could see them, massive shapes moving through the darkness of nightmare space. They flowed around the Earth ships like water around rocks in a stream, never touching, but always watching. "How can you tell?" her assistant asked, squinting at the strange readings. Patricia pulled up more data on her screen. "See these energy patterns? They're repeating. Complex, but not random. This isn't chaos, it's language." For hours, Patricia studied the patterns. While the rest of the fleet focused on surviving nightmare space, she tried to understand it. The entities outside were trying to communicate, and after 20 years of human ships traveling through their realm, they were getting better at it. "Captain," she called over the ship's comm, "I need to show you something." Captain Morris arrived quickly, looking tired but alert. 4 days in nightmare space had left dark circles under everyone's eyes. "What have you found?" the captain asked. Patricia pointed to her main screen, where she'd compiled hours of sensor data. "The entities out there, they're not just random creatures. They're guardians." "Guardians?" Captain Morris looked skeptical. "Of what?" "Reality itself." Patricia pulled up an ancient star chart she'd found in the ship's database. "Look at these patterns. The entities move in specific ways, following paths that match old maps of dimensional weak points. They're not trying to break into normal space. They're protecting it." Just then, something massive moved past the window. Unlike the other shapes in nightmare space, this one seemed to pause, turning what might have been its attention toward the ship. "It's watching us," Patricia whispered. "They've been watching us for years, every time we pass through. They're not attacking because they've realized something about humans." The captain stepped closer to the window. "What have they realized?" Before Patricia could answer, the ship's sensors lit up with new readings. The entity outside was releasing energy in a pattern she'd never seen before. "It's trying to talk to us," she said, quickly adjusting her instruments. "Not like before. This is different, more direct." The pattern on her screen shifted, forming shapes that almost made sense. Patricia's head hurt as she tried to understand. But slowly the message became clear. "Oh my God," she breathed. "They're not just guardians. They're teachers." "What do you mean?" Captain Morris asked. Patricia's hand shook as she explained. "Humans aren't the only species to ever travel through nightmare space. We're just the only ones who kept doing it. Every time we pass through, we learn a little more. The entities, they've been guiding us, teaching us how to understand this place." The massive shape outside moved closer, and for the first time, Patricia saw patterns in its impossible form that she recognized. Mathematical constants, physical laws, but twisted in ways that open new possibilities. "That's why other species can't handle nightmare space," she continued. "They try to force it to make sense, but humans, we adapt, we learn, and the entities recognize that in us." Captain Morris stared at the swirling patterns on the screen. "Are you saying these beings have been training us?" "Yes, but not like we train someone," Patricia explained, pulling up more data. "Every time our ships pass through here, our brains adapt a little more. We learn to see things differently." The entities noticed this and started helping it along. The massive shape outside moved again, creating patterns of energy that the ship's sensors struggled to record. Other entities began gathering around it, their impossible forms weaving together in ways that made Patricia's eyes water. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a new set of readings. "They're showing us something. The patterns, they match the alien fleet's movement through normal space." Captain Morris leaned closer. Can you interpret what they're trying to tell us? Patricia studied the data, her mind racing. Years of engineering experience combined with countless trips through nightmare space had taught her to see patterns where others saw only chaos. They're not just showing us the alien fleet, she said slowly. They're showing us how to. Oh no. What is it? The entities aren't just teaching us to survive nightmare space, Patricia whispered. They're teaching us how to use it. How to bring it with us. Just then, Navigator Robert Clark's voice came over the comm. Captain, we're approaching the exit point. The alien fleet is just ahead in normal space. Patricia looked at Captain Morris, her face pale. Captain, if I'm right, we're not just going to surprise the alien fleet. We're going to show them exactly why humanity travels through nightmare space. Explain, the captain ordered. These entities, they're bound to this dimension. Or at least they were. Patricia pointed to the swirling shapes outside. But they've been studying us just like we've been studying them. They've learned from us too. And now? Now what? Now they can follow us out. Not all of them, but enough. We're not just their students anymore. We're their doorway. Captain Morris's eyes widened as she understood. You mean when we exit nightmare space? We won't be alone, Patricia finished. And the alien fleet is about to learn why some doors should stay closed, and why humanity keeps watch over them. As if in response, the entities outside began to move in perfect synchronization with the Earth fleet. They weren't just following anymore. They were forming up, like an honor guard escorting humanity's ships. All hands prepare for space transit, Captain Morris announced over the ship-wide comm. And Chief Engineer Hughes. Yes, Captain. When we exit, I want you monitoring every reading you can get. Something tells me we're about to see something that no human has ever seen before. Patricia nodded, her fingers already flying over her console. After years of traveling through humanity's nightmares, they were about to show the galaxy exactly what those nightmares could do. The entities outside seemed to pulse with anticipation. They had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Humanity had proven itself worthy of not just surviving nightmare space, but understanding it. Now it was time to show the galaxy why that mattered. Commander Daniel White watched from his tactical station as the Earth battle fleet prepared to exit nightmare space. Through the main viewer of the EFS Valiant, he could see the darkness beginning to thin, like morning fog burning away in sunlight. All weapons ready, he reported to Captain Morris. The alien fleet won't know what hit them. That's not entirely true, Patricia Hughes said from her engineering station. They're about to know exactly what's hitting them. That's the point. The exit from nightmare space wasn't like their usual transitions. This time, the entities followed close behind the Earth ships, their impossible forms somehow staying stable, even as reality began to normalize. Transit in 10 seconds. Navigator Robert called out, his voice tired but steady. 9, 8. Daniel checked his tactical display one last time. The alien fleet was just ahead of them in normal space, their 10 million ships arranged in perfect attack formation. They had no idea what was coming. 3, 2, 1. Reality tore open. The Earth battle fleet burst into normal space directly behind the alien armada. But they weren't alone. Behind them, the tear in space grew larger instead of closing. Through it came the entities of nightmare space, their forms somehow even more terrifying in normal reality. By all the stars, Officer Green whispered, staring at his sensors. They're actually here. In normal space. Daniel watched as the entities spread out around the Earth fleet like an honor guard. In normal space, they looked like pieces of living darkness, their forms shifting between shapes that hurt the mind to look at. The alien fleet noticed them immediately. Ships began to turn, their weapons powering up. But something strange was happening to space itself around them. Look at their formation, Daniel said, pointing to his tactical display. The entities are herding them, like sheepdogs with sheep. It was true. The massive alien fleet was being subtly pushed into a new formation, their ships clustering together as the entities moved through their ranks like sharks through a school of fish. Message from the alien flagship, Officer Green announced. They're asking what we've done. Captain Morris smiled. Put them on screen. The main viewer lit up with the image of Ambassador Krell. The four-armed alien looked terrified, his blue skin almost white with fear. What have you humans done? He demanded. You've brought them here. You've doomed us all. No, Captain Morris said calmly. We've shown you why we travel through nightmare space. Those beings you see, they're not our enemies. They're our teachers. And now, they're our allies. As if to prove her point, one of the entities moved closer to the Valiant. In normal space, its size became apparent. It was bigger than the largest Earth battleship. You don't understand, Daniel said to the ambassador. We didn't just learn to survive nightmare space. We learned its purpose. Those entities, they're guardians. They protect reality itself. And now they've decided to help us protect it too. The alien fleet tried to scatter, but the entities kept them contained. Not through force or weapons, but simply by being there, their presence alone enough to make even the bravest alien crews think twice about moving. You have a choice, Captain Morris told the ambassador. You can turn your fleet around and go home, or you can find out exactly what humanity has learned from our time in nightmare space. On Daniel's tactical display, he could see the alien ship's power readings dropping. One by one, they were powering down their weapons. Perhaps, Ambassador Krell said slowly, we should discuss this situation more diplomatically. I agree, Captain Morris replied. And this time, let's be honest with each other. Humanity doesn't travel through nightmare space because we're arrogant or crazy. We do it because someone has to. Someone has to know what's out there, understand it, and make sure it stays balanced. The entities moved in perfect formation with the Earth ships, their presence a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity hadn't just survived the darkness between stars. They'd learned to work with it. And now, 10 million worlds were learning why that mattered. Lieutenant Lisa Rodriguez stood at her weapons station, watching as most of the alien fleet powered down their weapons. Most, but not all. Captain, she called out, 3,000 ships are breaking formation. They're charging weapons. The rebel ships, led by a faction of the Kharkith who refused to surrender, turned to face the Earth fleet. Their weapons were powerful enough to destroy planets. But today, they faced something worse than just human ships. Let them come, Captain Morris said calmly. It's time they learned. The entities of nightmare space moved forward, their impossible forms distorting the space around them. Reality itself seemed to bend where they passed, like fabric warping under great weight. They're firing, Lissa announced. Massive energy beams shot from the rebel ships, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. But when the beams reached the space where the entities moved, something strange happened. The energy didn't hit anything. It just disappeared. No, not disappeared. It went somewhere else, somewhere between spaces. Holy, Lisa whispered, checking her readings. The entities aren't fighting. They're redirecting, moving the energy into nightmare space. The rebel ships fired again and again, their crews growing more desperate as none of their attacks had any effect. The entities flowed around the energy beams like water around rocks, sending each blast into the spaces between reality. This isn't a battle, Chief Engineer Hughes said from her station. This is a demonstration. She was right. The entities weren't trying to destroy the rebel ships. They were showing the galaxy something important. There were forces in the universe that couldn't be fought with normal weapons. One of the rebel ships tried to jump to faster than light speed. The space around it twisted, and instead of escaping, it found itself moving backward, like a fish caught in a current. They're starting to understand, Captain Morris said. Finally. Lisa watched as reality itself seemed to ripple around the rebel fleet. The entities weren't just blocking their weapons. They were changing the way space itself worked around them. Message from the rebel flagship, Officer Green announced. They're begging for mercy. Captain Morris nodded. Tell them to power down all weapons and rejoin the main fleet. The entities will let them go. As the rebel ships complied, Lisa saw something amazing. The entities began to move in patterns that matched the Earth fleet's formation perfectly. It wasn't just cooperation, it was synchronization. Look at this, she said, showing her readings to nearby crew members. The entities aren't just helping us. They're teaching everyone a lesson, showing them why we were right to keep traveling through their space. The main alien fleet watched in silence as their rebel ships were gently herded back into formation. Not a single ship had been destroyed. Not a single life had been lost. But every species in that fleet had learned something they would never forget. Send a message to all ships, Captain Morris ordered. Tell them this is why Earth's fleet uses nightmare space. Not because we want to fight, but because we need to understand. Because someone has to know how to handle things that don't follow the normal rules of space and time. The entities moved back into position around the Earth fleet, their forms somehow less terrifying now that their purpose was clear. They weren't monsters from humanity's nightmares. They were guardians of reality itself, and they had chosen humanity as their students. And now, 10 million worlds had seen why. Captain Susan Morris stood in the grand meeting hall of the Galactic Council, the same room where Lieutenant Baker had been attacked just days ago. But now, things were very different. Representatives from 10 million worlds sat in tiered seats around the hall, their eyes fixed on the human captain. Behind her, visible through the hall's transparent walls, one of the entities from nightmare space floated in normal space, its presence a silent reminder of recent events. We were wrong about humanity, Ambassador Krell said, his forearms moving in a gesture of respect. We thought you used nightmare space out of arrogance or madness. Now we understand it was something else entirely. Susan nodded. Necessity. Earth's early space travelers discovered something important. The beings in nightmare space weren't just random monsters. They were sentient, intelligent, and they had a purpose. She touched a control panel, and a hologram appeared in the center of the hall. It showed the pattern of known space routes, with dark lines marking the paths where reality grew thin. These entities guard the weak points in space, she explained. Places where reality itself needs protection. When humanity first entered nightmare space, we didn't know this. We just knew it was the fastest way between stars. But you kept going back, another ambassador said, even after you learned what lived there. Especially after we learned what lived there, Susan corrected, because we realized something important. If those entities were guarding reality, someone needed to understand them, work with them, help them. The entity outside moved closer to the window, its impossible form somehow less frightening now that people understood its purpose. Human minds are different, Chief Engineer Hughes added from her place beside Susan. Our evolution on Earth, facing predators and surviving countless challenges, gave us something unique: adaptability. The ability to face the impossible and learn from it instead of running away. Ambassador Krell stood up. The Galactic Council has reached a decision. We will no longer demand that humanity stop using nightmare space. Instead, we ask that you teach us. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. This was unprecedented. The Council asking one species to teach all others. It won't be easy, Susan warned. Nightmare space changes you. You have to learn to think differently, to see reality as more flexible than you're used to. Many of your people won't be able to handle it. But some will, Krell said. And those who can will help us understand what you've been trying to tell us for years, that sometimes the darkest paths are the most important ones to travel. Susan looked out at the entity floating in space. It had taken on a form that almost made sense now, as if it was trying to meet them halfway in understanding. We accept, she said. Earth will help teach those who are willing to learn. But remember, we don't control the entities. We work with them. They chose to help us because we chose to understand them. As the council session ended, Susan stood at the window, watching the entity move through normal space. Chief Engineer Hughes joined her. "They're beautiful, in their own way," Patricia said softly. "Once you understand what they are." Susan nodded. "Guards at the gates of reality. And now, thanks to humanity's stubbornness, they're not standing guard alone anymore." The entity outside moved in a pattern that both women had learned to recognize as agreement. Humanity had done more than just survive nightmare space. They had built a bridge between realities. And now 10 million worlds understood why that mattered. In the depths of space, the entities continued their eternal watch. But no longer alone. Human ships still traveled through nightmare space, now accompanied by the first brave crews from other species, learning to see beyond normal space and time. The darkness between stars wasn't empty anymore. It was a classroom, where humanity taught the galaxy that sometimes the scariest path was the most important one to take. And the entities, ancient guardians of reality itself, watched and approved as their first students became teachers, showing others why Earth's battle fleet would always travel through nightmare space, not because they had to, but because someone needed to show the way.